All right. So again, thank you everybody for coming. George Polo, owner and pro staff for Jig Pro. Kind of give you guys a quick story of where this all started. Back in 2018, I opened my store on Commercial. We started selling this thing called slow pitch stuff. Everybody looked at us like we had horns coming out of our head. They're like, what is this crazy piece of metal with these little noodle rods? And what am I supposed to go catch bass on this? And we're like, no, you catch anything in the ocean. And like, yeah. So we had a wall in our old shop, maybe like the size of those hooks over there, and nothing ever sold, ever, like ever. There was maybe at that time 50 people in the country doing slow pitch jigging. So we kept pushing, and then I was really the one that started importing jigs from overseas, bringing in the top brands, because the history of slow pitches, it really started about 25 years ago in Japan. So on the other side of the world, it's old news already. Here, it's a new fun thing for us to be doing. In 2018, many of you guys know Benny Ortiz. I showed Benny a list of jigs I can get from overseas, and he looked at the list and goes, you can really get all these. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, you can get all these here. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I'll make you a list. So Benny went through the list. I had a list about 70 pages long and picked out the first jigs that we brought in from overseas. Huge hit, started selling. The craze started happening a little bit. People started catching fish. People started getting excited about slow pitch, but it was really still slow until about, I'd say at least 2020 is when it started to pick up. And then as most of you guys know, in the last 18 months, it's exploded. What's good for you guys, not good for people out of the country or other parts of the country, is we live in the slow pitch jigging mecca of the United States. From many aspects. You have stores like mine that carry A to Z. There's probably now 5 or 6 stores just like mine that carry A to Z for slow pitch jigging. And every store carries something, maybe not all the right things, but you can get something in almost every store now, where back in 2018 when we started this, there was, people ordering from Malta, paying $150 to ship a rod. So we're blessed here to have it all, but we're also blessed to have the waters. Fishing out front's great. It's out front fishing. If you fish out front, you know what that is. But we have Pulley Ridge really close, the Keys really close. You guys live in the Keys, have a house down there. Oh no? I thought you had a house down there. Oh yeah, but didn't you have a house down south too?
We're just going down there for it.
Oh, okay, gotcha. But we have plenty of places you can go. Bahamas, amazing jiggery. So you got all these places you can do it, pretty awesome. Back in 2020, I think what I always strive myself on was to be the first or to find the craze next, right? And I was on the internet looking, and then I had a buddy come in. He's like, man, you got to check out this brand, Jig Pro. I'm like, Jig Pro? There's a jig I haven't seen yet? Hold on a second. So I started looking. I'm like, holy crap, these are cool. So I reach out to George, and he's like, yeah. He goes, I'm so excited. And he was already so into jigging. Not even from a business standpoint. He was into it like most people get into it. All you want to do is jig. And he's like, I'm like, so I want to be the first store to sell your jigs. And he's like, okay, I don't know if I can, but we'll figure out a way. So fast forward a few months, we were the first store to launch Jig Pro. You guys know now, you can't walk in the store and not see it. In my opinion, probably the biggest slow pitch brand in the United States right now, and growing. So congratulations to George on that.
Thank you.
And ever since, there's a crew in slow pitch jigging, like there is in everything, of guys that were the beginners, that put their time in and found things and did things. George, Tony, this guy right here does not like the publicity. But if you ask me, maybe nobody agrees with me, but that's the best slow pitcher in America right there.
I'm an enthusiast.
Yeah. So, and he's one of the originators. When was the first time you slow pitched?
When I first met Benny in 2016.
Yeah. So back then there was nobody, so some say Benny, some say him. I say him, Benny, they're both equals and really good. So, and then back in 2019, I hired this kid that was working at Bass Pro, that wanted a job and wanted to work in a reel tackle shop. Tristan over there. He's grown too big for us. He's a world record catcher and stuff now. So if anybody doesn't know, he was in the Maldives for 10 days 2 weeks ago and caught a potential world record. It's called a black sneok. A really weird fish that was really, really big. And it was submitted to the IGFA, and IGFA just posted it the other day saying it's potential. It's probably, in our opinion, knock on wood, it'll be approved as a world record fish. So,
hopefully,
all
yes.
on jigs. Our buddy Ethan caught a 97-pound black grouper, which would have been a world record, but the IGFA doesn't quite recognize jigging yet.
There's
the way
the
that
hooks,
we do
yeah.
it, because you're only allowed 2 hooks per jig to be a record, and slow pitch you use a lot of 4-hook rigs. So his wasn't at that time, but George is working very close with IGFA and a lot of other organizations to make the sport recognized on an international level. So they may change that at some point. I don't know if they're going backwards.
We're trying.
So tonight the main thing is a lot of you guys in here, I know a lot of you guys are probably interested in slow pitch. We don't want to go like too crazy in it. Beginners, tell you the basics. Slow pitch is like an addiction. Do you need the best of everything? No, I mean, yes. But you could get in it and do it with not the best of everything. Prime example, first time you came in, what'd I tell you? Buy the cheap jigs to start, go practice, gravitate towards stuff you'll like better once you get the feel and flavor down. So George will walk you guys through that. I can tell you guys, there isn't many people that know more about slow pitch than George. He's not only the guy that makes it, he fishes it, he tests it. Unlike a lot of the other jig companies, not to mention any names, George actually designs jigs and makes them from scratch rather than buying like a jig that's available in the Orient and just putting your name on it. At that point, you're just labeling it. He designs these jigs. So the thought process of going into making them is a long process. Perfect example, the strike. Oops, sorry, I didn't realize that's what that was doing.
Okay.
The strike, oops, no, sorry. So the strike is a jig that George designed. The first idea of this jig started in our old store. We're like, we need to make another jig. What kind of jig should we make? A really long jig. He goes, all right, let me get to work. So he went with Mr. Miyagi over here, and they started pouring lead, and then test it, didn't work. Go to the next one, test it, didn't work. Go to the next one, and then now this jig's a proven jig and designed by George.
It took about 5 goes and a good like 6-7 months of like research and testing.
So just like as an example, you know, you want to make a jig, you got to come up with a mold. So George does it all in house. There will be a day he makes this jig 2,000 grams, probably, I guess. You know, something like that. So me personally, like, we built our store on selling all authentic products from the Orient. What I mean by that, there's a lot of brands in my store. They're very expensive because they're imported. There's knockoffs of those jigs. I don't believe in the knockoffs. It's just not how we built our store. Not knocking the knockoffs, it's just not our choice in them. I give the respect to the person that put in the work and designed the jig. And for a local guy, he's the only one that's American that's designing jigs in the US right now. Besides a couple of real small guys that just launched, which are really cool and up and coming, but he's one that puts in the work. So he'll walk you through the basics. Some of the fish he's already caught. I mean, a couple weeks ago he caught a swordfish on jig. These guys are dialed in. Tony here, who's filming, is a charter captain up in Jupiter. He's got the golden tiles dialed in like no other. And I'm not talking like golden tiles, I'm talking like golden tiles. So they're crushing the tiles. There really isn't a fish you can't catch on slow pitch. I mean, I don't think there is any.
Always somebody just caught a bonefish on a slow pitch.
Yeah, peacock bass, inshore fishing. The technique works for everything.
Sailfish.
Yep.
Sails.
Sailfish. I've seen every snapper grouper. It demolishes the bottom fish. So Jamie Bunn's here tonight, guys, too. Jamie's the owner of Blue Water Movements. Many of you guys may know who he is, some don't. He puts on the Sailfish series of tournaments that just finished here. It's a 3-leg series. And then he puts on the summer series, the Pompano Beach Saltwater Series, which is a 3 meat fish tournament. Jamie last year had no clue about jigging. I had my Yankee trip planned, so Jamie came with us, him and his son, never jigged before, and they caught more fish than half the people on the boat. Just jigging. So it was really exciting for him, his son, but anybody can do it, young, old. That's the beauty of slow pitch, is that unlike speed jigging where you want to jig, and then beer, you can actually do this for a long period of time. So to get started, we'll let George go in. He's got a PowerPoint presentation for you guys. And then just real quick, after the seminar, we're gonna have time for questions for George. And then for all the people that showed up, we're gonna do 15% off on Jig Pro products and 10% off on any other products.
Nice.
So that's on me. Cool.
Thank you. All right, guys, so my name is George, and as Mike said, I work with Jig Pro, I own Jig Pro, and with another few guys, we took the brand to the next level. And today is really all about basics. There is a lot of information out there. I get a lot of questions, and not necessarily the right information for the people just starting. And this is also like a good, refreshing seminar for people that are already into it. because even me, I've been doing it for long enough, but sometimes it's good to just sort of like go backwards and like think about the basics and apply it back to your existing technique. So it's good for everybody. Let me get started right here. All right, this is funny. So how I ended up here, Mike said a little bit about me. I'm gonna talk very briefly about me, and I'm gonna jump right on what is the slope jigging and specifically or the tackle and walk you guys through it. But I'm originally from Spain. Fun fact about me.
From New York.
Yeah. From Valencia, right? So I've been fishing all my life, right? And I got introduced into slow jigging or jigging in general when I was about 14 years old. Unfortunately, in Spain, we don't have the greatest fishery, so there is a lot of commercial fishing, and it's very tough fishing in general. So I started watching all of these videos in the internet, all of these Japanese and all these Asian guys with these like tiny noodle rods and pieces of metal catching all these weird fish. So I became really interested on this and started doing my own research. And I just got right hooked into it. You know, the beauty of this thing is, it is a rabbit hole, but it's a fun process, right? So that's sort of like how I got into it. And then fast forward a few years later, I moved to Atlanta. I met my wife. I moved here to the States, and I worked in a factory. I worked in the plastic industry, and I had access to all of these molds and all of these designs. So I decided to start creating my own things. And sort of like I would come down here. My in-laws lived in Jupiter here in Florida, and I'll come down and use my stuff. And I loved it. And then COVID happened. So I decided to move down here with my family. And then I was lucky enough to meet these guys here, you know, Rob, Benny, and all these guys, and saw my creations, and they sort of like, you know, they loved it. And then, you know, met Mike and ended up here. You know? And after that, like 2020 until today, it's just been crazy. You know, this slow jigging is just crazy. We're like super lucky that people are getting super involved and really enjoying what we like to do. And it's sort of like flawless, right? Now, I'm gonna talk about, this is like super basic so you guys can understand what actually, how did this happen, right? And going back a little bit, jigging has been around forever, you know, 25, 28 years ago. Even here in the States, people have been jigging for long periods of time, you know. I'm sure some of you are familiar with like diamond jigs and all of this stuff. I mean, we've been jigging indirectly for a long time. We just haven't evolved as quick as the Japanese did, right? So sloppy jigging specifically was created in Japan, and pretty much was created because the commercial fishing there was like super rough, right? It wasn't very regulated, so it was very difficult to go fishing. So there was a couple guys there that started developing a new fishing technique to sort of like bring back the recreational fishing industry, right? And this is sort of like what sloppy jigging is, what it brought back all the recreational fishing to Japan, believe it or not. So that's how sort of like it happened. Why? So these are like the three main points about slow jigging, and this is why it's so effective, right? So these allow us to fish deeper. You catch more variety. I mean, you never know where you're gonna catch. And then you can fish during the whole day, right? So it's not like a morning bite or an afternoon bite. I mean, you literally you never know. You know, that's why it makes it so addictive. It's not like you're going wahoo fishing and you're trolling high tide or low tide. With the slow jigging, it doesn't matter. So it just opens a lot of possibilities, and that's why it became so successful. And that's why everybody here is like, wow, I gotta try this. Because you truly go out there and catch fish, you know? And specifically, the main target when you're slow jigging, I mean, you can catch about anything, but the target is to target all of those juicy bottom species that we all want, right? Grouper, snapper, AP, scope, all of this good stuff that lives on the bottom. So that is really the key here. Now, let's get deeper into what we actually need for sloppy jigging. And you know, jigging is more about, a big part of jigging is is about your system, right? And we always talk about the rods, the jigs, but what you really need is a system to be able to like catch the fish that you're looking for, right? So I'm gonna start with the rods, and I'm gonna walk you through the rod, the reel, the line, and the jigs and the hooks, and see if I can give you guys a better understanding of what's really going on. So specifically with the rod, I mean, everybody talks about the noodle rods, and it's kind of funny, but the main goal of having a rod like this, it's all about the action, right? So you having a piece of lead down in the ocean, and while it's falling, you're trying to give it a specific action so a fish will eat it, right? So you're holding this rod for a long period of time. So you need something light. You need something with the right action. So it's going to be a slow action. And these rods, as you see, they're super parabolic. I mean, some of these rods, I mean, they can bend backwards and they still don't break. So that's sort of like the basic of the rod, right? And then we can get into more details about like weight and things, but the really basic is you need something light, parabolic,
Let's spin that rod for me.
and a slow action.
So when you're jigging, your rod's gonna come down, right? You're gonna go up, pull up on it, and your rod's gonna come down. That's your action. So the first misconception we see with a lot of rods are people think that a different power means it's a stronger rod. Really, if you look at these two different ones,
They're the same.
all right. So even if you had two different powers here, from here down, it's virtually the same rod. It just the tip gets lighter for a lighter to move the jig. But the actual fighting power of the fish doesn't change. So your power 1, 2, 3, you can fight the same fish on a 1, 2, or 3. And just one's gonna move your jig better than the other one. But the power-wise, go ahead. Go ahead. Don't be scared. Go ahead. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up.
I mean, you got some power.
Pull up. You can put more heat on it. The key is your technique, which we'll get into a little bit more. You do that, you'll never break a rod.
Yeah, I will get into that a little bit later. Cool, and he just talked about this, but like with any sloppy jigging rod, the real rods, right? Again, they're super light, they're super high tech, they're also super technical. So you really got to keep in mind that if you high stick the rod, there is a very high chance you're gonna break it, right? And that's a very important notice. You know, that's a very important note because you spend a lot of money in this. This is an investment. You gotta take care of it. And you know, for us that we just launch our rods, or for any rod manufacturer, it hurts to see some customers breaking rods. You know, it's something that we don't want. And you know, there's not a whole lot of education about this, but like this not only applies for slow jigging, applies for any type of fish or any type of rod. You know, there is a lot of bottom rods that you high stick, you'll break. So you can apply this to any of your fishing techniques. It will be beneficial for you. My recommendation, the way that I fish, I use my reel to fight the fish, and I'm gonna get more into that later. But I always tell everybody, like if you are just getting into it, a good way to do it is always think that when you fight in the fish, keep that rod under your arm. If you keep that rod under your arm, you're gonna be fine, right? Because as you see the angle here, so the fighting angle is always gonna be a 45 degree or smaller. Once you cross that angle, you get into the danger zone, and you're starting to put the pressure in the wrong spot on the rod, and you can potentially break it, right? So you keep it down here, you sort of like, you know, you can't go any past like 45, right? You'll have to like go backwards. But if you put it right here, immediately as an instinct, we're gonna go higher, and therefore we're gonna break it. There's some rods out there that can't do it. They're very expensive. They still break. That's all I'll say. So there's some of them will handle some high sticking, but it'll be a $600, $700 rod. You don't want to break it. You know, it's one of those like you don't need to do that. Also, the way that you fight the fish when you have the rod under your arm, you're using your reel, but you're putting more pressure, believe it or not, on the fish when you have your rod under your arm than when you're high sticking. Because when you're high sticking, the angle changes and you're putting the pressure on the rod.
Can you stand closer to the mic? People are asking online.
Yeah.
You couldn't see the TV. So
Sorry.
You couldn't see the TV and you.
All right, cool. So when you are putting it here, you are putting pressure on the rod and not on the fish. So when you hook a big fish, you want to really transfer that pressure into the fish. And I'm going to get more into the fighting technique in a second. But yeah, keep that in mind. That's like super important. you do all that investment, don't break it, bro. For just because you are like doing a bad use. And then the reel. I consider the reel probably the most important part of the system. I tell everybody, this is where you're gonna concentrate your buying power. So you wanna spend money, the majority of your budget should be in your reel, because that's where it's gonna fish. It's gonna fight the fish. And when we get into reels, there is 100 reels in the market right now, what is great for us sport. But you're looking really for these 4 points or 5 points here. So you want something that has a high retrieve. I'm talking about 39 inches plus, right? High torque, so you have a lot of power, right? Lightweight, high line capacity, and a narrow spool. So he's got 100 different models in there, jigging models, but the one common denominator for the true sloppy jigging reels are these, right? So they're gonna be high retrieve, high torque, super light. Again, we're going back to the light tackle. We're holding these for long periods of time, and high light capacity, and a very narrow spool.
Where'd you get that reel from?
From you.
You stole it off my rod.
Next thing up, and we're going up in like, I'm trying to cover the whole system so you guys can get a better understanding how important actually this is to be able to be successful. All right, so the line. We're very lucky to live in the year that we live because today's, the lines are so well developed. I mean, the technology going in the braided lines in the market right now is absolutely crazy. There's nothing wrong with any line out there, I think, for as long as it's an 8-strand braided line, and it's gonna be thin. I mean, there's a lot of brands out there. You'll find cheaper or expensive. Some of them break higher or the other, but even the worst line out there, I mean, is the gold line.
That is on the 8-strand.
Okay.
The Ozuri's a 5-strand. That's probably the #1 used braid by far in slow pitch jigging. And some 4-strands are good too, so don't let the 4-strand scare you. Sometimes even better for slow pitch because it's thinner. And then what you can't, with line, that's probably the most commonly asked question I get in my store about line is, what's the breaking strength? What's the breaking strength? What's the breaking strength? They all break through the roof. It almost should be illegal in terms what they break at.
Mm-hmm.
The Ozuri 20-pound breaks at 44. Spider wire breaks above 40. So you're fishing a 20-pound line that's breaking above 40. Is it a 20-pound line? Is it a 40-pound line? So that you don't have to worry about. Diameter's big, but what you can't measure in line is abrasion resistance. There's nobody out there that can give you a report on how it reacts to structure, a wreck, a fish's mouth. So that's all something you gotta play with and feel. We've all kind of found the lines we like that are more abrasion resistant. And then we found lines like George will go fish super deep where he just needs diameter.
Yeah, I'll
You're
just
not
like
as
8
worried-
pound to
yeah,
go
you're
for
not
tile
as worried
fishing.
about the abrasion because when you're out 2,000 feet, you're really probably gonna hit nothing on your way down. But if you're fishing a wreck in 500, you're gonna hit rocks, coral, a wreck. That's where abrasion comes in. So there's no one application line, but just, I didn't want to get too much in line, but there are some 4 and 5s that are really good too.
Yeah, so again, like this is the basics, but the cool thing about this whole jigging is we consider ourselves pioneers, right? And we are very aware of what's happening in the world. Every year there is a new company coming with a new line. We're testing these things because the line is super important in our system, right? So we want a thin diameter. We just discovered like a couple months ago there's a new brand that has a very even thinner diameter we were using before. So we're constantly adapting to what's happening to make our presentation, our whole system better, right? Cool. And now, of course, the jigs, right? There is a lot of jigs in this room, right? And we get a lot of questions, I'm sure you do as well, about what shape, what color, and things like that. I personally do get a lot of questions about colors. And for us, guys doing it like more, color and look is the least important, all right? We look at the glow and we look at the UV reflecting paint, all of that is great. But what we look at first is the shape and the size. And the least important part is always going to be the actual look at them, right? So the basics are usually, I'll grab a couple of.
You could say color doesn't matter, but I think it does.
it does matter, but I grab a couple shapes in here so you guys can see them, right? So these two jigs are similar weight, but they look completely different, right? So every jig shape is designed for a different condition. And again, when we are out on the ocean and we are trying to jig, it's very important to understand what's going on, right? So how fast the boat is moving, what direction I'm going, how deep I'm fishing, right? So that's gonna be very important in my jig selection. And the jig selection is almost, I'll say like, probably the most important part of the whole thing. Because if you don't get the right presentation, you're not gonna get a bite, right? And just as a general rule, we're gonna use wider profiles when we have lower current. And we wanna use longer, skinnier profiles when we have higher current. Why? So wider profiles like these are gonna take longer to get to the bottom, and they're also gonna catch more water. So we have a high current, this acts like a lift. And when we are slow jigging, one of the basic principles is to stay vertical. So we work through this whole system that I'm just talking about just so we can stay vertical and have the right presentation. It sounds crazy, but it's all about that being vertical out there. So again, your jig selection, basics, shape, if I'm moving, just to throw some numbers out there so you guys can like have some reference when you go out there. So if you have a current, so your boat is moving, let's say from 0 knots to like 1.5 knots, you can use a wider profile. If you are moving any faster than 1.5 knots, I would stick with longer, skinnier profiles. So again, you're gonna get faster to the bottom, you're gonna have better contact with that bottom, and therefore you're gonna have more strikes. Now, the downside of the shape, one versus the other. I just said that these wider profile would get slower to the bottom, right? So if I have current, I'm gonna have to use a skinnier profile. What you gain or lose, so these would be great for high current, but also this jig is gonna give me less action than this jig. So, you give some, you take some. But at the end of the day, the most important part is to have that good contact on the bottom and stay as straight up and down as possible. So that's like really, this is about like the most important part of the whole seminar here, okay? And I know I'm talking a lot, but hopefully towards the end, you guys can link everything together. And now, of course, hooks. So we fishing, we need hooks. There is a lot of like hook configurations out there. And before we all finish here, I'm gonna open it up for Rob to open a more complex hook discussion for the guys more advanced. But basic slow pitch jigging, what we all done since the beginning is to use twin hooks. So, and I get this a lot as well. Can I just get away with hooks on tops? Yes, you can, but the reason why we're gonna use, one of the reasons why we use hooks on top and bottom is these hooks are not super heavy hooks, right? Super heavy duty hooks. And the line that we use is pretty thin as well. So if you hook a big fish and you're only hooking in one of these hooks, this hook can only pull so much, right? When you have hooks on the bottom as well, the chances that you're gonna get more hooking points are a lot greater. And what we try to do pretty much is to get more hooking points when we hook one of these fish. Usually what happens is you'll drop it down, you have a grouper that goes towards the eye part, that's where I see more often. They grab it here, and when you pull it, this second set of hooks will just get a snack. And now, you're not pulling that 20, 30 pound fish just in one hook. Now you have 4 hooking points, you're distributing that weight, and therefore you have a higher chance you're gonna land that fish. And that's super critical there.
Why don't you use super heavy duty hooks?
Right, so that's a good one. So, and again, it's like give it or take. So could I put super heavy duty hooks in here? Yes, but I'm gonna be killing the action. I'm absolutely gonna be killing the action of the jig. And also I'm gonna be generating a ton of drag. Remember, the basic slow jigging is to be vertical. Is to be vertical. If you can stay vertical and have full contact with your jig, you're gonna be fine. Putting a heavier duty hook is gonna create more drag, it's gonna kill my action, and therefore I'm gonna get less bites.
So like that jig is weighted in different directions, it's gonna make it dance. If you put weight, bigger, smaller on one end, you're killing way was purposed to dance or
Yeah.
for the action.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask that question. Why not just use? I use these big guns offshore. I use this. Or I use that. Why don't we use that? It's all part of the system.
Yeah, and the more you get into it, the more you realize how much we thought through all of this. There's a lot of little details, but it works, I promise. So 100% recommended twin hooks on top and bottom, especially in that shallow water. I'll get a little bit more deep here. Once you get,
Consider shallow for the guys just getting into it.
yeah, so we
What
consider,
you guys consider shallow and what a jigger considers shallow.
Yeah.
Two different things.
so that's funny. So we'll consider shallow from, let's say, 80 feet. We can micro jig shallower than 80 feet, but we'll start like slow jigging traditionally from 80 feet up to, I'll say, yeah, about 350, 450.
Yeah. So 450 in normal fishing terms is not shallow, but in jigging,
It's shallow.
we consider that shallow. That's where your twin hooks are going to come in.
Yeah. And again, if you're gonna do that first range, if you are beginning to learn how to do it and just getting into it, my recommendation is to stay in that shallow area. You're gonna find things a lot easier. You have plenty of time to complicate your life later on, and it'll get better as it goes. But for the guys that are already more into it and trying to get, there is a tendency of this slow jigging rabbit hole. We all want to go fish deeper and catch all of these like weird species. You'll get there, but it's better to start shallower to get more familiar with the tackle. It's going to be lighter. It's going to be easier. You're going to find bottom better. So this is what you most are going to use, and you're going to be fishing mostly 80 feet to 350. That's where I recommend you guys stay to begin with. Once you start being comfortable and catching fish and fighting some of those big fish, then you're going to venture yourself into the deeper area. So once you get into the deeper stuff, things get a lot more interesting. So when you are in the shallower, everything is a little bit more predictable. You know more or less where you're gonna catch. But once you pass that 450, 500 range, literally you don't know what you'll catch. I mean, recently I happened to catch a swordfish on a jig in 950 feet of water. That's how crazy this is. Once you get into deeper water, the hook configuration can change. We found over time the single hooks on the deeper water were better, right? Again, back to staying vertical. Now I'm fishing 500, 600, 700 feet of water. This jig is going to travel through a long distance, right? And I want that jig to get to the bottom as fast as possible. These hooks, twin hooks, are going to have more drag on the way down than single hooks. And also, very important notice, when you are, if you're fishing in 500 feet of water, you don't want to hang bottom, okay? So having single hooks will prevent hanging bottom. And it also will give you a better solid hookup. We are experimenting with single hooks in the shallower. Just until now, we're still seeing better success with twin hooks on the shallow. So, but we are seeing a lot better hookup ratio and hookup landing once we pass that 500 range with single hooks. So this will be your setup from 80 feet up to 350, obviously changing the weight of the jig and everything. I'm talking about hooks. And then single hooks from that 500 feet until, I don't know, 3,000 if you can, right? And then very important as well, I get a lot of questions about these. Personally, we use a ball bearing swivel. There's people that like to use solid ring on top. Do not tie your line into the split ring up here or directly to the hook. It won't be good, right? You'll lose fish because of that. So I like to set it up like this, ball bearing swivel, split ring, hook, hook. That's like my setup. Same here. He has matter of fact, like he has a bunch of like mats over there, like showing the rigging part. It's very important. I mean, guys, you're gonna do an investment, put the time out there, you're gonna finally hook that fish. Don't lose a fish because you don't have a ball bearing swivel. It's one of those, like, you know, it works. A couple of cool facts about ball bearing swivels. They actually, the main reason why we start using ball bearing swivels is when we start fishing that 200 and deeper area and you catch one of these groupers. You know, groupers blow up when they come up and they start spinning. So you don't have a ball bearing swivel. What happens? Everything gets tangled, and we found ourselves losing a lot of fish just on the way up. That fish is already not fighting anymore. It's coming up, and all of a sudden it comes undone because it's spinning and it gets tangled. It comes unhooked. So you prevent that with the ball bearing swivel. At the same time, it tends to give you better action as well, because if you think about it, if this jig is falling and it spins or something on the way down, you have a ball bearing swivel, it's always going to be a straight line, and it just works better. It's just one of those, like 100% recommend a ball bearing swivel. And yeah. And now, let me get in the technique. Before I keep going, everybody has any questions? Good. Is it a lot of information? We're good? We're getting there? All right, cool. So once we have the system, we had the jigs, we made all those decisions. Jigging is all about decisions, right? Just like life. So we're gonna go into the technique. And I like to put, say things simpler. And from my point of view, jigging and appropriate action is about creating a slack on my line. And people say, like, how's that possible? Well, you can consider yourself a good jigger if you can create a controlled slack in your line. Keep one thing in mind. Slow jigging is all about the falling action. 90%, if not more, of the strikes are gonna be on the fall. All of these jigs are designed to work when they fall. That's why the shape, right? And it's simple. When you're jigging, you load in that rod. I'm actually gonna do this real quick. Very simple. I'm gonna show it to you because that way it looks less abstract. And it sounds more complex than it is, but it's really simple. The main concept is, if I'm not creating a slack on that line, just hold it for a second. I'm not gonna pull too much, just like that. So let's say I'm fishing, I go to the bottom, I'm fishing like 300 or 400 feet of water. Go to the bottom, I'm straight up and down. I got the best combo ever. And now I'm focusing on my technique, right? So I'm gonna hit bottom, I'm gonna close my reel. And what I say slack in my line, I say once I hit bottom, I'm gonna come tight. I'm gonna pull that jig, lower my rod. That jig is gonna come up. And then I gotta bring my rod faster than my jig. And that's where I created my controller slack. Come down again. So I'm gonna get down, I'm gonna pull that jig up, and that jig is gonna fall, but I'm creating a slack on my line. And it's as simple as that. There's nothing else. If you can create a controller slack in your line, you're gonna get bites. And then you can get deeper into this by how fast I'm gonna bring my line, how much I'm gonna retrieve on my reel to control that slack. But it's all about that slack, believe it or not. So again, I'm gonna get down, I can come up, go down, come up, go down. That'll be the basic. But now if I'm doing that, I'm just staying on the bottom. So I wanna cover some of that water column. So I'm gonna combine that. I'm gonna come down and, well, go a little slower. So I come up and then reel have a crank. But I'm creating that controller slack. So, and let me write it on the board so you guys can get a little better understanding. But does that make sense, creating that controller slack on the line? Because keep in mind this thing. Every time I'm slacking, every time I'm pulling that rod up, the rod is loading, it's flickering my jig, a nice flicker. If I don't have a slack on the line, the jig is gonna go back like this and go down. That's not good. So I wanna go up, the rod is gonna flicker my jig, and now creating that slack, I'm gonna allow my jig to swim down. If I'm not creating a slack, my jig is doing this. Like this, I mean, you can get a suicide fish. There's a few of those out there. That happens. But, you want to catch consistently. So it's all about that slack, again. And I'll do it here real quick. This actually helped me a lot when I was watching some of these Japanese videos and I couldn't understand a clue what they were saying. This is the part that I understood because they were drawing it out. So pretty much I'm jigging here, I'm gonna bring it down, my jig hit bottom, and then, let's put that jig is like here. So it's gonna come up, and so I come up, I wanna retrieve, that's what I want. So I come up, So let's say if I come out 3 foot, I only want to retrieve half of that. Because if I retrieve all 3 foot, then I'm going to count time, not creating a slack. So what you do in creating that slack is you will come up flatter, come up flatter, come up flatter.
Do you retrieve the line when it's at the bottom of its fall, or are you retrieving some line as it's falling?
As it's falling. Once you get more technical, you start doing it on the way up.
Okay.
Good jiggers will retrieve on the way on the race. That requires a lot of coordination. For the basics, you want to retrieve it on the fall. But like the good, dialing guys, they'll actually retrieve on the way up.
On the way up?
Because they'll maximize your slacking time. That's what I'm saying. It's all about that control of slack. The more you can control that slack, the more advanced you are, and the more bites you'll get. And then eventually, once you, and it might look more complex than it is, but it's not. For as long as you're moving that rod and creating slack, your jig is swimming, you're gonna get bites. What you don't wanna do is, if you're out there, hold on. You don't wanna be doing this. Because I'm not creating any slack. If you're doing that, very difficult you're gonna get any bites. So, if there is like 3 things I want you guys to take home from this, the number 1 is get a good system. The number 2 is stay vertical. The number 3 is create slack. If you take those 3, you're catching fish. If you can take just 3, just take those. Now, and this is like pretty basic stuff. Like I just showed you the action, right? Pretty basic as well in my technique. When I'm jig fishing, personally I love catching grouper. So the grouper are close to the bottom, right? I always want to keep my jig on the target species. Again, the whole slope jigging thing was created around bottom species. When you get down, you gotta have constant contact with the bottom. So if you're out there fishing and you're dropping your jig down, you feel bottom, you come jig, 3, 4, 5, 10 foot, drop again, and you don't find bottom, that's not good, right? Again, you can catch a suicide fish around there, that's good. But what is gonna get you good is always check with your bottom, always. So what I'm gonna do is, so let's say this is 200 feet, my groupers are here. So I'm gonna bring my jig, I wanna do something like this. But obviously flattering, right? And I'm gonna stay for grouper, snapper, all of those like good tasting, rewarding fish are gonna be in that first 30 foot of the water column. Eventually, you'll catch a grouper on the way up, 150 feet off the bottom. It'll happen, they'll follow and they'll come and get it. That's why, while you are vertical, you want to stay on the bottom. When you come up to maximize your catches, keep jigging, jig it all the way up. Because guess what, in the middle of the water column, you have a lot of good stuff as well. You have your tunas, your wahoos, and all these things. If your main target is to target those pelagic species, again, tunas, we catch them on the bottom sometimes, but the usual area is gonna be the middle of the column. Fish that middle of the column, right? That's important. I always like, these guys fish with me a lot, but I fish the bottom really cold, and then when I come up, a little trick is I'll speed up my movement. So I'll move these faster. And I forgot this in here, but it's called a slow jigging. These fish like it slow, I promise. I find myself catching bigger fish when I'm moving my jig slower. I know it sounds crazy. They want an easy prey. And this is the whole thing about that falling action. What this jig is doing is imitating an injured bait. What I want to do is present it so close and so easy for them that it's like a no-brainer. It's like it takes no effort to get it. And that's the main reason why we catch so many species, because it's effortless for them. It's right in their faces, it's pissing them off, and they're gonna get it. A lot of the times, we catch in species that they're not predators. So you'll catch a lizardfish on a jig this big. A lizardfish that is this big. Like how? It's territoriality as well. And that's the benefit of this. Like that's why slow jigging works so well. Because you don't have to have those fish be hungry. They don't need to be hungry. They just need to be around there. They'll hit it. They'll hit it. And a lot of those little fish are like super aggressive as well. And sometimes, I mean, as I said, we'll catch in a 500-gram jig, a fish like that. Territoriality. That doesn't belong where they are. I mean, you have a tiny fish here, you send a shiny, noisy thing down there, they're gonna hit it. They're gonna hit it because it doesn't belong there. Great for us because we catch all of this cool stuff, right? That is a little bit about more of the basics. Is that make sense? To stay in the right area? That's super important. It sounds easy, but a lot of the time, including me, when I started, I didn't think about that. I go jig. Let's jig. But hold on, I want to catch a grouper. Well, I want to stay on the bottom, right? And then going back to that slow action, they like it slow. You want to create that, it's like slow. Don't be afraid to go slow. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's called slow jigging. I see a lot of people get into it, doing it too fast.
When you say slow, slow is when you're raising the rod up?
Mm-hmm.
You say you raise it up slower.
Yeah, so you'll just, slow jigging is like dancing. There is so many different ways of dancing. So you can dance like salsa, that is super energetic, or you can dance a tango, that is like, but you always dance it with rhythm. This is just like that. Personally, when you're closer to the bottom, I have better success dancing slower. As I come up, I dance faster. These fish live in this part of the water column, the higher part of the water column, they move faster. We're talking about tuna, we're talking about kingfish, all these things, they move faster. They gonna hit it faster. These fish down here, they're lazy. They're on the bottom, they're sitting there. Those groupers are just sitting there. They don't wanna work. They're not gonna, very rarely they're gonna chase it. So, slow, slow. Don't be afraid. I mean, I just did this. A lot of the things, recently I had a lot of success just posing my jig on the bottom. Dropping it to the bottom, and just leaving it right there. Like, just sitting in here, I'll bring it up, I'll touch bottom. I'll bring it up without lowering the rod. And I call it big face. I mean, I call some big face recently doing that. So again, slow jigging, slow. Don't try to rush it. It's all good. And there is this like misunderstanding that when you move it faster, you're gonna get more strikes. You might get more strikes, but you won't strike the right thing. And that goes back into like this part of the water column. This is where you probably get more energetic strikes, but also where all the fish you don't want to catch are as well. When I say fish you don't want to catch are fish that are going to take your jigs. So all the toothy predators happen to live just around here. So your kingfish, your barracuda, your sharks are here, your wahoo are here. I mean, don't take me wrong, I love to catch a wahoo, but I lose 20 jigs for one hookup. So if you're concerned about losing jigs, keep it to the bottom. If you are concerned about losing jigs, move it slower, because you won't be triggering those fish as well. So that's another good point. Now, let me get into bow position, and this is very important. I know I'm talking about a lot of stuff, but this is really important because, as you know, slow jigging, you do it from a boat, right? From a platform. And this took me to figure it out about 2 years myself. So I'll go out there, not just here or Spain, or I used to work in a big sailboat, so we'll go around the world and we'll put in a new port. I go dinging and I'll go jigging. So, I wasn't paying attention to recording all these things, so I'll get to a new port and it's, I'll pull out my avionics app and I'll see the chart. Looks amazing, let's go there. And sometimes I'll fish and my jig will go away and I won't catch anything. Later, after I meet guys like him and other guys, we start talking about it, and I start seeing people casting the jig against the current, because there isn't a a static bow position. It doesn't exist. So you can't be on a boat in the ocean. you're always gonna be moving. Your boat is always gonna be moving. Sometimes slower, sometimes faster. So this applies to everything. From you're always gonna be moving, even if it's like 1 mile an hour or half a mile an hour. Your boat is always gonna have some sort of drift. So this applies to all levels of speed, right? When your boat is moving. So let's say you're on a boat up here, and again, this took me about 2 years to figure it out. So this is your current. This current could be here front. It's gonna be your Gulf Stream that runs from the south to the north, especially in those like beautiful summer days. It's glassy, it looks beautiful, but it's ripping. So you have 2 knots of current going this way, right? And you here, you're in 400 foot, let's say, right? Now, where do I set up on the boat? That's a good question right here. So in my let's say my drift is going this way, right? So this is gonna be north, south. So what I'm gonna do is, and this is probably the bow of the boat. Let's say the bow is, right? Does that make more sense? So we're drifting sideways. I recommend drifting sideways. It's gonna give you more space if you're going on your own boat. If you go on a party boat, for sure you're gonna drift sideways. When you're jigging and you're starting, like drifting sideways is probably the best option. Then there's people that throw like 3 anchors and then the boat will head to the current and things. That's good as well. But usually you're gonna be drifting sideways. So what I always recommend is instead of dropping, so let's say I'm here, right? Instead of dropping my jig down here, right? So if I drop my jig down here, let's say this is 400 foot of water, and let's say that this distance takes about 45 seconds, probably more than that. Like it takes from my jig 45 seconds to get down here, right? So guess what? If I'm moving at 2 knots, 45 seconds later, my jig is not here. It's here. That screws up the whole being vertical. So that is like, that's gonna cut my fishing time, that's gonna cut my presentation and all of that. How do I use this fishing time? Because this is all fishing time. Once the line gets here, I gotta bring it up and start over. Once I get too much scope, I gotta bring my line up and start over. So how do I use this fishing time so I can get a better strike? It's simple. I'm gonna cast my jig. Where? Up current, as far as I can. Now, don't do that, okay? Just undercast. So I'm gonna cast my jig. I'm gonna try to cast it. Let's say if I cast it like 20, let's say 20, 15 feet this way, jig gonna get down here. It's still gonna take 45 seconds, but instead of being here, right? This was the first one. I lost all of these. Now, when it gets down, I'm gonna be right in here. Guess what? All that I was wasting, now I'm fishing. That took me 2 years. And that changed my jigging life. That changed it a lot. This right here is one of those secrets that will change your catching rate big time. Big time. Does that make sense? That's here front, but if you're on the West Coast, if you are whatever, set up the boat. If you're on your boat, look at your GPS, see what direction the boat is moving, how fast you're moving, and understand where you're gonna have to cast. But always against the current. Always against the current, right? So when the jig goes down, I can fish more. Now, most of you, since we're here, I'm getting more deep into it, but since we're here,
might as well explain scoping, what a scope
Yeah.
will look like.
and go back to like the whole like vertical thing. Okay. So why I'm doing all of this, why vertical is so important. So the jigs are all designed, all jigs, all them slow pitch jigs are designed to be moved straight up and down. And it's simple. I wish I could show you this underwater, but if you see this underwater, when I jig it, it flickers and it goes sideways. when I'm like straight up and down, right? Now, once I change my angle, so if I'm straight up and down, I'm gonna jig it, it's gonna go sideways, and it's gonna swim beautifully. Once that jig is there, and this angle changes, so I'm not here, this jig is not gonna flatter at all. I'm gonna lose more than 50% of the action. What is this gonna do? Reduce my fishing chances. And that's why jigging is so important. So, and let me write it down for you here. Like, if I'm straight up and down, that jig will do that. If, let's see, if I'm like here, that jig will just simply do that. It won't flatter. I can't create a slack if I'm not straight up and down. It's just simple as that. You think you're creating a slack, but you're moving the belly of the line. So these, when you think you're slacking, the jig is simply going down. Now, there are some shapes that will swim sideways a little bit. These not so much. This jig will swim sideways a little bit. Usually longer shapes imitate more like a sand eel and things. So it'll go sideways a little bit. That's why this is considered a high current jig, because it will actually have more action than a thing like this when you're scoped down. Again, no ideal, but there. And just to finish this segment here, I know this is a lot of information, but when you're fishing, to give you like a better like number, if you're out there, and your line, so this is what I want. So this is the ideal. Now I changed the current, right? So we're going that way. So I'm gonna scope that way. So your ideal angle is this, 45 or less. Once your line gets a higher, 45 degrees, you're not doing anything. I mean, again, you'll catch a suicide fish here and there. You're not doing what you should be doing. And I'll show you that like more specific. So this is, I'm straight up and down here. This is how a 45-degree angle looks like on the water. That's what you'll see. So I want to be here, between here and here. If I'm here,
Sometimes you'll be over here on a drift boat that got ripping current, just pick up and reset. This like this, you just, all your jig is a parachute.
yeah. And this will be my number 4 point. So I said 3 other important points. This will be number four, most important point of the whole seminar. Like when you are on the water, this is where you're gonna fail. You wanna be here, you don't wanna be here. That's gonna decrease your hookup ratio big time. So look for that. Cool. All right, up to the next segment. So we did all of that, and now we hooked. What happens next? So what I just explained is about only 50% of the whole thing. So you do all of that, you have your system, you do all of this, you vertical, you finally, you're on. Now, you gotta figure out a way of how to use this rod to land a fish like that. And the whole tackle, right? My tiny hooks, my thin line, everything. This is 50% of the thing, if not more. You'll get bites, but
Like 180% so far.
but no, but this is important. You know, people think, you know, I'm gonna get a hook, I'm gonna hook, and then what happen? I had so many people. I've been on a boat so many times, and somebody's like, "Huh? Now what?" But now you gotta land this thing. How I'm gonna do that? I went through that a second ago, but like again, my fighting technique for a thing like this. So always understand your tackle. Again, I've been working you through how sophisticated or how like, you know, where the limits of the tackles are. So I know I have a rod, I can know I stick, I know I have, so like thin line, it breaks high, but it's still thin line. And a high, you know, the thing that I can use the most here is gonna give you the most power is gonna be my reel. So the way that I'm gonna fish, so let's say I'm hooked, I'm not gonna high stick it, I'm gonna keep it under my arm. And what I'm gonna use is, instead of using the rod to like try to whack this fish, forget about the rod. Focus on the reel. Focus on cranking. When you hook a fish like this, The most important part, the only thing you have to be worried about is to turn the handle.
Now remember, typically this is going to be going down.
Yeah.
I'm sitting.
It's gonna be like that.
Move, but it's going to be going in the downward direction.
Yeah. So that fish is gonna be pulling down. Again, don't change your fighting angle in your arm. You lock here. Now you crank and crank and crank. And I can do so much. I can put so much power into that line just cranking my reel. These reels have a crazy amount of torque. And remember, they retrieve, you know, some of them up to like 50 inches per crank. So one crank is 50 inches.
Yeah, one turn of the handle is going to retrieve that much line. So it doesn't take a whole long time to get that fish up. So it's all about turning the handle.
Yeah. So just keep in mind, when you do all this, you'll get hooked up. You need more drag in there. You'll get hooked up, but like, don't worry about anything else. Keep your reel locked in.
Same rule with
A reel.
fishing, all other fishing. Stay tight.
And just reel.
Give him slack.
Yeah, of course.
Lose the fish. And then I tournament fish all Jamie's tournaments. We got a rule on our boat that we say all the time, and I feel like it applies to jigging the same. You rest, he rests. You take a rest, that fish is taking a rest. It's a tug of war between the two. So, you know, that massive grouper right there, that's a ginormous grouper. How long did that really take you to catch? Like really to land it?
But that fish, it was about like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I think, the actual
About
fight.
50 minutes. It got rocked up. So
But I
we
got
had to get
rocked
him off
up.
the rock.
So,
But even like in traditionally, it's a lot less than people think.
yeah. Yeah, it's no hours.
It's a fight, it's endurance, but to think that you can catch a fish like that on a small gear like this, even in 15 minutes, isn't that long if you think about it.
I caught that fish in this exact setup. Same reel, same rod. That's it. 20-pound line. The cool thing about all these bottom species, something an advantage for us, is they blow up. So if you get a good 10 cranks out of the fish coming up. So that's why I like tell everybody, forget about everything else, just crank. Just crank, point that rod down, and crank, and crank, and crank, and crank, and crank. Once you have like, I don't know, 3, 4 cranks, just relax. But don't do this, just relax here, and just keep cranking. But if you can just think about that basic thing of just when you hook, point your rod down and crank, you'll land a lot of fish. And it sounds basic. I had to remind myself sometimes as well, but cool. All right, cool. So I think that completes the basics. My recommendation for all of these, based on my experience and all the years of hustle, is research. So get out there, look for information, ask your jigging community. We are lucky we have all of these platforms right now. Like you can reach out to me personally, you can reach out to him, but there's also a bunch of like Facebook pages at the moment out there.
It's Jigging America is a Facebook group that just started recently that's got some good info on it.
Get in there, ask the questions. If you have a question, just put it out there. You know, we have this social media platform for everybody. Let's just use it for.
Social media is an evil bastard also. And sometimes when you ask an entry-level question, people want to, come down on you pretty hard.
It's okay.
None of us standing here believe in that. So you can reach out to any of us with any question, novice, advanced. Nobody's going to be like, oh gosh, why is he asking me that question?
Yeah.
Now, I did get a question once. Somebody asked me how many shrimp come in a dozen. That one I was a little bit, tested with today. But that's real life, by the way. That really happened.
Cool. All right. Well, the next thing is obviously passion. I hope you guys enjoy these, get deep into these, and we can meet somewhere along the journey in one of these boats. I fish a lot. I try to fish more than I do right now, but hopefully I find you guys on the way and we can share some fishing time. Perseverance, put some time on it, and you'll be successful. Okay. And now I'm gonna open it up for questions. So we're gonna do a little segment for questions, and then Rob is gonna bring up like a more advanced topic to discuss here real quick. Yeah.